I never thought I'd be dismantling Christmas at 76. The dining room table stretched before me like a monument to disappointment. Set for 7 with my grandmother's china and the silver candlesticks that had graced every holiday for decades. 3 empty wine glasses caught the lamplight, and the turkey I'd spent all day preparing grew cold in the kitchen. One by one, the phone calls had come. Harper from her ski lodge in Aspen, Miles from some photography assignment in Costa Rica, June from her ex-husband's house where she'd decided to spend Christmas for the kids' sake. 50 years of Christmas traditions. It's reduced to me eating cranberry sauce alone, while snow piled against the windows of Alderwood House. But here's what my children didn't know. That night changed everything. Would you believe a mother could decide to sell the family home her kids expected to inherit, all because of one lonely Christmas dinner? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Eleanor Rowan, though most people call me Ellie, and I suppose I should start by telling you about Alderwood House. It's a colonial built in 1892. With wide front porches and maple trees that turn the most spectacular shade of gold every October. When Richard and I bought it in 1975, we were 31 years old with 3 young children and more hope than sense. The house cost us $42,000, which felt like a fortune then. And Richard spent every weekend for the next 2 years fixing the plumbing and rewiring the electrical system. The walls hold 48 years of memories now. There's the height chart penciled inside the pantry door, tracking Harper, Miles, and June's growth from toddlers to teenagers. The kitchen counter still bears a small burn mark from when Miles tried to make breakfast in bed for my birthday when he was 12. The living room carpet has a wine stain from Harper's graduation party. And the basement stairs creak on the 3rd step from a time June and her friends tried to sneak back in after curfew. I've been alone in this house for 15 years now, ever since Richard passed from a heart attack while raking leaves in our backyard. For the first few years after his death, the children visited regularly. Harper would drive up from New York every other month, usually staying through Sunday, and helping me with household projects. Miles would stop by between assignments, sometimes for weeks at a time, filling the house with his cameras and stories from whatever corner of the world he'd been documenting. June lived just 2 towns over then, and she'd bring the grandchildren for dinner every Sunday, their laughter echoing through rooms that had grown too quiet. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Harper's visits became less frequent, then eventually limited to major holidays and family emergencies. Her law practice consumed more of her time, and she began treating our conversations like legal consultations, discussing practical matters, with the same detached efficiency she probably used with clients. Miles started booking longer assignments, sometimes disappearing for months without more than a postcard or a brief email. June got divorced 3 years ago, and between her job at the insurance office and managing custody arrangements, she rarely had time for much more than hurried phone calls. I understand, of course. Life gets complicated as children become adults with their own responsibilities and relationships. I raised them to be independent, to build their own lives, and in many ways their success is a testament to the foundation Richard and I tried to provide. Harper makes more money than we ever dreamed possible. Miles has had his photography featured in National Geographic twice. June is raising 2 beautiful children largely on her own and doing it with remarkable grace. But understanding doesn't eliminate the loneliness that settles over you when holidays approach and you realize you'll be celebrating alone. It doesn't fill the silence that seems to grow heavier each year, or ease the feeling that you've become an afterthought in the lives of the people you love most. I've tried to stay busy. I volunteer at the library twice a week, helping with their literacy program. I sing in the church choir, though my voice isn't what it used to be. I maintain a small garden behind the house, growing tomatoes and herbs that I mostly end up giving away to neighbors. I have coffee with Helen Alvarez every Tuesday at Millfield's Cafe, where we solve the world's problems over blueberry scones and complain about our various aches and pains. Helen is my closest friend, has been since our children played together. In elementary school, she's 74, retired from nursing, and now runs a small bed and breakfast with her late husband's life insurance money. Helen has always been the more practical one between us, the type of person who says exactly what she's thinking, regardless of whether you want to hear it. When I mention feeling isolated from my children, she reminds me that they're not mind readers, that I need to be more direct about my needs. When I express guilt about feeling disappointed in them, she points out that disappointment is a natural response to unmet expectations. You spent 50 years putting everyone else's needs first, she told me last month over coffee. Maybe it's time to put yourself first for a change. The idea seemed both radical and terrifying. After decades of defining myself primarily as a wife and mother, I wasn't entirely sure who I was beyond those roles. Richard and I had talked about traveling after retirement, about seeing the places we'd only read about in books. We'd discussed downsizing to a smaller home, maybe something near the ocean where we could watch sunsets and take long walks on the beach. His death had ended those dreams, or at least that's what I'd assumed. But Helen's words stayed with me. At 76, I could reasonably expect another 10 or 15 years of reasonably good health. Did I want to spend those years waiting for children who might never prioritize time with me? Did I want to continue maintaining a house that had become too large and too expensive for one person simply because it held sentimental value for people who rarely visited? The financial reality of keeping Alderwood's house had become increasingly challenging. The heating bills alone cost more each winter than my monthly Social Security check. The roof needed replacing, the hardwood floors required refinishing, and the ancient boiler made sounds that kept me awake some nights. I had savings thanks to Richard's pension and careful financial planning. But I could see how quickly those could be depleted by major home repairs, more than the financial burden, though was the emotional weight of maintaining a shrine to memories that seemed to matter more to me than to anyone else. Each room held reminders of family gatherings that no longer happened, of traditions that had been quietly abandoned. The piano in the living room hadn't been played since June's daughter lost interest in lessons 3 years ago. The formal dining room saw use only when I ate alone with a book, feeling slightly ridiculous using the good china for a meal of leftover soup. I had begun to feel like a curator in a museum that no one wanted to visit. The house preserved our family history beautifully. But what was the point of preservation if no one was interested in experiencing it? What was the value of maintaining traditions if you were the only one still practicing them? These thoughts had been building for months, maybe years, settling like sediment in the bottom of my consciousness. But it took Christmas Eve 2023 to bring them fully to the surface, to transform vague dissatisfaction into clear resolve. Something about setting that table for 7 people, about preparing a feast that no one would share, about waiting by the phone for calls that brought only excuses. It crystallized everything I'd been feeling into a single, startling moment of clarity. I didn't want to spend another holiday alone. I didn't want to continue investing my emotional energy in relationships that felt increasingly one-sided. I didn't want to spend my remaining years as a supporting character in other people's stories. For the first time in decades, I wanted to put myself at the center of my own narrative. The first call came at 11:30 Christmas Eve morning while I was basting the turkey. I almost didn't answer, my hands covered in butter and herbs, but Harper's ringtone has always demanded attention. Even as a child, she had a way of making her needs feel urgent. "Mom, I have terrible news." Her voice carried that particular tone she uses when she's about to disappoint someone but wants to sound appropriately remorseful. "The weather here in Aspen is absolutely incredible, and Brad's convinced me we should stay through the holiday. You know how rarely we get time like this together?" I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed between my ear and shoulder, watching grease pop in the roasting pan. "But Harper, we've had this plan for months. I've prepared dinner for 7 people, I know, and I feel awful about it. But you understand how important this is for my relationship, right? Brad and I barely see each other during the year, and this skiing has been so good for us. We'll make it up to you, I promise. Maybe New Year's? The turkey timer buzzed, and I found myself mechanically turning off the oven while processing her words. Brad was her boyfriend of 8 months, a fellow attorney she'd met at some conference. I'd spoken to him exactly twice, both brief phone conversations where he'd been polite but clearly distracted. What about Miles and June? Are they still coming? Oh, I assumed you'd heard from them by now. June mentioned something about spending Christmas with Derek's family this year. For the kids, you know, and Miles is on that assignment in Costa Rica, isn't he? The casual way she dismissed our family gathering. As if it were just another scheduling conflict to be rearranged, hit me harder than I expected. Harper, this is our first Christmas all together in 3 years. We'll have many more, Mom. You're being a little dramatic, don't you think? It's just one Christmas. It's just one Christmas. Spaches. As if the months of planning, the careful coordination of schedules, the grocery shopping and house cleaning and preparation meant nothing. As if the fact that I'd been looking forward to this gathering for weeks was irrelevant compared to Brad's ski schedule. After we hung up, I stood in my silent kitchen for several minutes, staring at the feast I'd been preparing since dawn. The dining room table was set with our best china. The centerpiece I'd spent an hour arranging looked perfect. And the smell of turkey and stuffing filled the house with the promise of celebration. But suddenly, it all felt hollow, like a stage set for a play that had been canceled. The second call came an hour later. Miles' voice crackled through a poor connection, competing with what sounded like tropical birds and distant music. Mom, you're not going to believe this, but they've extended my assignment here through New Year's. The magazine wants additional shots of the wildlife preserve, and the light here this time of year is just incredible. I'm getting some of the best work of my career. I sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling very tired. Miles, it's Christmas Eve. We talked about this last month. I know, and I'm really sorry. But this is National Geographic, Mom. This could be career-changing. For me, you understand how important that is, right? There was that phrase again. You understand? As if understanding their priorities meant I shouldn't have any of my own. What am I supposed to do with all this food, Miles? I've cooked for 7 people. Can't you freeze some of it? Or maybe invite Helen over. I'm sure she'd love a home-cooked Christmas dinner. Suggestion that I could simply substitute my friend for my children struck me as particularly obtuse. Helen had her own family Christmas planned, her own traditions and obligations. The idea that loneliness could be solved by interchangeable dinner companions revealed how little Miles understood about what this gathering meant to me. When will you be back? Probably February sometime. Listen, Mom, I'm losing the signal here. I'll call you tomorrow, okay? Merry Christmas. I love you. The line went dead before I could respond, leaving me holding the phone in a kitchen that smelled like a holiday feast no one would eat. I tried calling June next, but her phone went straight to voicemail. When she finally called back 30 minutes later, her voice was strained and hurried. Mom, I'm so sorry I missed your call. We're at Derek's parents' house, and it's been completely crazy here. The kids are having such a wonderful time with their cousins, and Derek's mom has made this huge Christmas Eve dinner. I hope you don't mind, but we decided to stay here tonight. Mind? Such a small word for such a large feeling. June, we've had this plan since Thanksgiving. You said you'd be here by 2 o'clock. I know, and I really wanted to be there. But you know how complicated things are with the custody arrangement? Derek said if I kept the kids from his family on Christmas, he'd make things difficult for me in court. I can't risk that. Mom, you understand? There it was again. You understand? The thing is, I did understand. I understood that Harper's relationship felt fragile and required constant attention. I understood that Miles' career was hitting its stride at 52 and required him to travel constantly. I understood that June was navigating a difficult divorce and custody situation that colored every decision she made. What I couldn't understand was why my needs never seemed to factor into their decision-making process. Why was my Christmas dinner always the one that could be canceled? Why were my feelings always the ones that could be sacrificed for someone else's convenience? What about tomorrow? I asked June. Could you come for Christmas dinner instead? Mom, Derek's parents have this whole Christmas Day tradition with present opening and brunch and games. The kids are really looking forward to it. Maybe next week. I could bring them over next week. Next week wasn't Christmas. Next week wouldn't have the tree lights and the special decorations and the feeling of celebration that made family gatherings meaningful. Next week would just be an ordinary visit, a duty call to check on Mom. After June hung up, I walked through my house, seeing it with different eyes. The living room, decorated with garlands and lights, looked foolish for one person. The dining room table, set for 7, looked like evidence of my own delusion. The Christmas tree, which I'd spent hours decorating with ornaments collected over 5 decades, seemed to mock my expectations. I had done everything I was supposed to do. I'd raised children who were successful and independent. I'd been supportive of their careers, understanding of their relationships, accommodating of their schedules. I'd never made unreasonable demands or guilt-tripped them into spending time with me. I'd tried to be the kind of mother who enhanced their lives without burdening them. But standing in my empty house on Christmas Eve, surrounded by the remnants of traditions no one else seemed to value, I realized that my approach hadn't been generous. It had been enabling. By always being understanding, by always accommodating their needs over my own, I'd taught them that my feelings didn't matter as much as theirs. The thought was both liberating and terrifying. If I stopped being endlessly understanding, if I started prioritizing my own needs, would I lose them entirely? Or would I finally get their attention? Helen had been telling me for years that people treat you the way you allow them to treat you, that your children will continue to take you for granted as long as you make it easy for them to do so. I'd always dismissed her advice as too harsh, too unforgiving. But sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by enough food to feed a small army, I began to think she might be right. I spent the rest of Christmas Eve alone, eating turkey and watching old movies, feeling sorry for myself and angry by turns. The house felt enormous and empty, every creak and settle amplified by silence. The Christmas music playing softly in the background seemed designed to emphasize my solitude rather than celebrate the holiday. But somewhere between the third glass of wine and the end of It's a Wonderful Life, my self-pity began transforming into something else. Determination, maybe. Or just exhaustion with my own passivity. I was 76 years old. If I lived to be 90, I had 14 years left. Did I want to spend those years waiting for children who would always have something more important to do? Did I want to continue organizing my life around people who organize theirs around everyone but me? By the time I went to bed that night, I'd made a decision that would have seemed impossible that morning. I was going to sell Alderwood House. I was going to take the money and build a life that didn't depend on other people's availability or approval. I was going to stop waiting for my children to remember they had a mother and start remembering I was more than just their parent. The decision felt both terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was choosing what I wanted instead of what everyone else needed. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of Vermont winter day that usually filled me with quiet joy. The snow sparkled like diamonds across the front lawn, and the maple trees stood stark and beautiful against the blue sky. But instead of my usual holiday contentment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation for my own future. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the real estate section from Sunday's paper, something I'd never done before except to satisfy idle curiosity about market trends. Now I studied the listings with purpose, trying to understand what Alderwood House might be worth in today's market. The numbers were staggering. Houses much smaller than mine were, selling for amounts that seemed fantastical compared to what Richard and I had paid decades ago. My phone rang at 9:30. June, her voice bright with forced cheer. "Merry Christmas, Mom. How was your evening? I hope you found something nice to do." Something nice to do. As if Christmas Eve were a scheduling problem I needed to solve rather than a family celebration. I'd planned for months. Was quiet, I said, not mentioning the tears or the wine or the decision that had crystallized as I sat alone in my beautifully decorated house. "I feel so bad about yesterday. The kids really wanted to see you. But you know how complicated things get with Derek's family? Maybe we could come over this week. I could bring lunch. That would be nice. June." But even as I said it, I was wondering if this would be one of our last conversations in this house. The thought should have saddened me. But instead, I felt oddly liberated. Harper called an hour later, her voice carrying the slightly breathless quality that meant she was multitasking. "Mom, I hope you had a wonderful Christmas Eve. Brad and I were just saying how much we wished we could have been there." "How was dinner?" "I ate alone, Harper." A pause. "Oh, well, I'm sure it was still nice. You make such beautiful Christmas dinners." The casualness of her response, as if my solitude were just another detail to acknowledge and move past, confirmed everything I'd been thinking. My children had become accustomed to my disappointment. They expected me to be understanding, to make the best of whatever crumbs of attention they offered. "Harper, I've been thinking about some changes I want to make." "What kind of changes?" Her voice sharpened with the attention she usually reserved for legal matters. "I'm thinking about selling the house." Silence stretched so long I wondered if we'd been disconnected. Finally, selling the house. "Mom, that's a huge decision." "Are you sure you've thought this through? I mean, where would you go?" "And what about all our memories there? Our memories." Interesting how quickly my individual decision became a collective concern. I haven't worked out all the details yet, just considering options. "But Mom, Alderwood House has been in our family for almost 50 years. It's where we grew up, where we always come home to. You can't just sell it." There was something in Harper's voice I recognized from her childhood, the tone she used. When someone threatened to change rules she'd taken for granted. The assumption that her emotional attachment to the house gave her veto power over my decisions. It's my house, Harper." Another long pause. "Of course it is. I didn't mean to imply otherwise. It's just such a drastic step." "Maybe. We should discuss it when I get back from Aspen. I could help you think through the financial implications. Help me think through as if I weren't capable of making decisions about my own life without her legal expertise." After Harper hung up, I called Helen. "Merry Christmas, you old bat," she said by way of greeting. "How was your celebration of family togetherness?" They all canceled. Every last one of them. Every last one. "Jesus, Ellie, I'm sorry. What did you do?" "I decided to sell the house." Helen's laugh was sharp and delighted. "Good for you. It's about damn time. When do we start looking at condos?" This was why I loved Helen. No hand-wringing about the magnitude of the decision. No concerns about what other people would think. Just immediate support for whatever I wanted to do. "I haven't gotten that far yet. I just decided last night." "Well, what are you waiting for? The market's red hot right now. Okay, you could probably get twice what you think the place is worth." That afternoon, Helen came over with leftover Christmas cookies and a bottle of wine she'd been saving for a special occasion. We spent 3 hours going through real estate websites on my computer, marveling at the prices houses were commanding and debating the merits of various towns where I might relocate. "What about Saratoga Springs?" Helen suggested, pointing at a listing for a 2-bedroom condo near the downtown area. "Good restaurants, cultural activities, reasonable cost of living. Plus, it's close enough that I could visit without making it a major expedition." The condo was beautiful, updated kitchen, hardwood floors, a balcony overlooking a small garden. The listing price was less than half what we estimated Alderwood House might sell for. which meant I'd have money left over for travel, for activities, for whatever retirement adventures I'd been postponing. I could walk to the coffee shops, I said, studying the neighborhood photos. Maybe take art classes at the community center. You could join a book club, go to the theater. Hell, you could take up ballroom dancing if you wanted to. The possibilities felt endless and slightly overwhelming. For so many years, my life had been constrained by the needs of other people and the obligations of maintaining Alderwood House. The idea that I could simply choose what I wanted to do with my days seemed both thrilling and terrifying. What if the kids never forgive me? I asked Helen as we scrolled through more listings. What if they do? What if this is exactly the wake-up call they need to start treating you like a person instead of a convenience? And what if it isn't? Helen set down her wine glass and looked at me seriously. Then you'll have learned something important about your relationship with them. And you'll still have a nice condo and money in the bank and the freedom to live your life however you want. Evening, after Helen left, I called the number on a real estate sign I'd driven past hundreds of times. Jonah Carter, according to the sign, specializing in residential sales. His voicemail message was warm and professional, inviting me to leave a detailed message about my needs. "This is Eleanor Rowan," I said to the machine. "I'm interested in listing my home for sale. It's a colonial built in 1892, about 4,000 square feet, located on Maple Street. I'd like to schedule a consultation as soon as possible." Hanging up felt like jumping off a cliff. There was no taking back that message, no pretending I was just exploring options. I'd committed to action, and the realization was both terrifying and exhilarating. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I spent the rest of the evening walking through Alderwood House with new eyes, seeing it not as the repository of family memories, but as a commodity to be evaluated and marketed. The formal living room that we'd rarely used would appeal to buyers who entertained frequently. The kitchen, with its original hardwood cabinets and vintage tile backsplash, had the kind of character that real estate listings always described as charming and full of period details. The bedrooms upstairs each told a story. Harper's room, with its pale yellow walls and built-in bookshelves, still held some of her law school textbooks and a few items of clothing she'd never retrieved. Miles' room had become a sort of storage area, filled with boxes of his photographs and equipment. He didn't want to transport between assignments. June's room was the most preserved, partly because she'd lived at home longer than the others, partly because she sometimes stayed overnight when visiting with the grandchildren, walking through their rooms. I felt a familiar pang of loss. These spaces held so much history, so many late-night conversations and teenage dramas and quiet moments of connection. But they also represented a phase of my life that was over. My children were adults with their own homes, their own lives, their own priorities. Maintaining shrines to their childhoods wasn't serving anyone, least of all me. The master bedroom felt the most personal to evaluate. Richard's side of the closet still held a few shirts I'd never been able to donate, and his reading glasses sat on the nightstand where he'd left them the morning he died. But even this room, heavy with memories of our marriage, felt like something I could leave behind if it meant moving toward a future that belonged entirely to me. My phone rang at 10 o'clock. Jonah Carter, returning my call. "Mrs. Rowan, I got your message about listing your home. I apologize for calling so late, but I wanted to get back to you as soon as possible. Would you be available for a consultation tomorrow morning?" His voice was kind, with a slight gravelly quality that suggested he might be around my age. Something about his tone made me feel less foolish about my impulsive decision. "That would be perfect. What time works for you?" "How about 10:30? I'd like to walk through the property and discuss your timeline and expectations." After we hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by Christmas decorations that suddenly seemed to belong to someone else's life. The tree lights twinkled cheerfully, but instead of warmth, they made me think about how many holidays I'd spent decorating for people. who couldn't be bothered to show up for the first time in months, maybe years. I fell asleep thinking about the future instead of dwelling on disappointments. Tomorrow, I would meet with a real estate agent. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of untangling myself from obligations and expectations that no longer served me. Tomorrow, I would start living for myself. Jonah Carter arrived precisely at 10:30, driving a modest sedan that looked well-maintained, but not flashy. I watched him from the kitchen window as he sat in his car for a moment, studying the house's exterior and making notes on a clipboard. He appeared to be in his early 60s, with gray hair and the kind of weathered face that suggested he spent time outdoors. When I answered the door, his handshake was firm and his smile genuine. He wore a navy wool coat over khakis and a button-down shirt, professional but not intimidating. Something about his manner put me at ease immediately. "Mrs. Rowan, thank you for calling Carter Realty. I have to say, this is a beautiful property. How long have you lived here?" 48 years? My husband and I bought it in 1975. "You've maintained it beautifully. Mind if I take a look around?" For the next hour, Jonah walked through every room, examining windows, checking the condition of floors and walls, asking questions about the heating system and the age of various appliances. He was thorough but respectful, clearly experienced at evaluating homes without making owners feel judged. "The bones of this house are exceptional," he said as we finished touring the upstairs bedrooms. "These wide plank floors, the original moldings, the craftsmanship, they don't build houses like this anymore. But there are problems too, aren't there? Things that need updating." "Some updating would increase the sale price, certainly. The kitchen and bathrooms are dated, though they have character. The electrical system probably needs work, and I noticed some windows could use replacement. But honestly, Mrs. Rowan, this market, houses with this much character and square footage are in high demand. You might be surprised by what offers you receive." We sat at the kitchen table while Jonah explained the selling process and provided a preliminary market analysis. The numbers he quoted were even higher than what Helen and I had estimated from online research. "This is a significant decision," he said carefully. "May I ask what's motivating the sale? Are you looking to downsize or relocate for family reasons?" The question felt personal, but something about Jonah's manner invited honesty. "My children all canceled Christmas dinner at the last minute. I spent Christmas Eve alone in this house. I realized I was tired of organizing my life around people who don't prioritize me." Jonah nodded thoughtfully. "Family dynamics can be complicated, especially when children move away and build their own lives. How are they taking the news about the sale?" "I've only told one of them so far. She thinks I'm being impulsive. Are you?" The directness of the question surprised me. Most people, especially professionals, would have offered some platitude about taking time to consider such a major decision. But Jonah seemed genuinely curious about my thought process. "Maybe, but I've been thinking about these issues for years. Christmas was just the catalyst that made me stop thinking and start acting." "Where are you considering relocating?" "I'm not sure yet. Somewhere smaller, easier to maintain. Maybe closer to cultural activities, restaurants, places where I can meet people." "You might want to consider renting initially," Jonah suggested. "Try out different areas before committing to purchase. The equity from this house would give you tremendous flexibility." The conversation felt less like a business transaction and more like advice from someone who understood the complexities of major life changes. When Jonah left, I had a stack of paperwork to review and sign, but more importantly, I had a timeline. He wanted to list the house within 2 weeks, hoping to capture the attention of buyers who might be relocating for job transfers or looking to purchase. Before spring competition intensified, that afternoon, Helen came over with coffee and her laptop ready to help me research potential new locations. She'd compiled a list of towns within a 3-hour drive that offered the amenities I'd mentioned: walkable downtowns, cultural activities, reasonable cost of living. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," Helen told me as we settled. At the kitchen table, about the kids not forgiving you. I want to show you something. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small silver bracelet, tarnished with age but delicately beautiful. My mother gave me this when I was 25 and getting divorced from my first husband. My father was furious about the divorce, said I was bringing shame on the family. My mother told me, Helen, you can spend your life trying to make other people happy and end up making everyone miserable, including yourself. Or you can make choices that honor who you are and trust that the people who really love you will understand eventually. She fastened the bracelet around my wrist. That was 49 years ago. My father came around after a few months, and my relationship with my mother became stronger than ever. Sometimes the people who love us need to see us stand up for ourselves before they remember to treat us with respect. The bracelet felt delicate against my skin. It's a tangible reminder that other women had faced similar crossroads and survived them. That evening, I called Miles in Costa Rica, managing to catch him during what sounded like a brief break in his work. Mom, Harper told me you're thinking about selling the house. That seems pretty drastic, doesn't it? It seems practical to me, Miles. I can't afford to maintain it much longer. And I don't need 4,000 square feet for one person. But where would you go? What would happen to all our stuff that's still there? Our stuff, the boxes of photographs, and equipment he stored in his childhood bedroom. The items he'd never bothered to retrieve because he knew I'd preserve them indefinitely. You'd need to collect anything you want to keep before the sale. Mom, I'm in the middle of this assignment. Can't just drop everything and fly back to Vermont? The house won't be listed for 2 weeks, and it will probably take a month or more to sell. That gives you plenty of time to arrange a trip home. This is really sudden, Mom. It feels like you're making major decisions without considering how they affect the rest of us. The accusation stung, partly because it contained enough truth to hurt. I was making decisions without considering their impact on my children. For the first time in decades, I was prioritizing my needs over theirs. Miles, when was the last time you made a major decision based on how it would affect me? Silence. Then that's different. I'm trying to build a career, and I'm trying to build a retirement. We're both adults making choices about our own lives. But, Mom, this is our childhood home. It's where we'll always think of as home base. A home base you visit once or twice a year, usually for less than a week at a time. That's not fair. You know, my work requires travel, and my life requires me to be realistic about what I can maintain and afford. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Miles promising to think about scheduling a trip home and me promising to keep him informed about the sale timeline. But I could hear the frustration in his voice. It's a sense that I was violating some unspoken agreement about my role in his life. June called that evening, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Mom, Harper told me about the house. Please, tell me you're not serious about this. I'm very serious, June. Why? I know we missed Christmas, but that's not a reason to sell the family home. We can do better. We can visit more often. When was the last time you visited? June? Not for a holiday or a family emergency, just because you wanted to spend time with me. Another silence. These conversations were forcing my children to confront patterns they'd never examined, and the discomfort was palpable. It's hard with work and the kids and everything with Derek, but I'll make more effort, I promise. Don't want you to visit out of guilt or obligation. June, I want you to visit because you want to. And if you don't want to, that's okay too. But I'm not going to continue organizing my life around the possibility that you might find time for me. That's harsh, Mom. It's honest. Where are you going to live? What if something happens to you? What if you get sick? These were the practical concerns that had kept me trapped in inaction for years. The fear that independence might lead to isolation, that self-sufficiency might mean abandonment. But sitting in my kitchen wearing Helen's mother's bracelet, I realized these fears had already come true. It's already isolated, already abandoned in the ways that mattered most. At least if I moved, I'd be isolated in a place I'd chosen, surrounded by possibilities instead of memories. I'll figure it out, June. Other people manage to age independently. I can too. But Mom, June, I've made my decision. Hope you'll support it, but I'm going to move forward regardless. After June hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about the conversations I'd had over the past 2 days. My children's reactions were predictable: shock, concern, attempts to talk me out of a decision they saw as impulsive and potentially harmful. But underlying their stated concerns was something else. Inconvenience. Selling the house would force them to collect their belongings, to find alternative places to stay when visiting Vermont, to reimagine family gatherings without the backdrop of their childhood home. It would require them to see me as a person with my own needs and desires rather than a stable, unchanging presence they could take for granted. Their resistance confirmed what I'd begun to suspect, that my role in their lives had become primarily custodial. I maintained their childhood bedrooms, preserved their memories, provided a reliable constant they could visit when convenient. The idea that I might want something different, something more, seemed to genuinely surprise them. But for the first time in years, their surprise didn't make me doubt myself. If anything, it reinforced my conviction that change was necessary. I'd spent so many years being who they needed me to be that I'd forgotten who I wanted to be. Helen's bracelet caught the lamplight as I reached for my phone to call Jonah Carter. When he answered, I could hear classical music playing softly in the background. "Mrs. Rowan, how are you this evening?" "I'm ready to list the house, Mr. Carter, as soon as possible." "Wonderful. I'll start preparing the paperwork tomorrow morning." "Are you feeling confident about the decision?" "More confident than I've felt about anything in years." "Good for you." Major life changes can be scary, but they can also be incredibly liberating. Something in his voice suggested he spoke from experience, but I didn't press for details. I was enough to know that someone understood why a 76-year-old woman might choose disruption over disappointment, uncertainty over stagnation. After we hung up, I walked through the house one more time, seeing it with seller's eyes now rather than sentimental attachment. Tomorrow, I would start decluttering, organizing, preparing to present Alderwood House to strangers who would evaluate it based on square footage and market potential rather than the memories held within its walls. The prospect should have saddened me, but instead I felt energized. Each step toward selling brought me closer to freedom from maintenance responsibilities, from financial strain, from the weight of preserving a family home that my family had outgrown. I was 76 years old, and for the first time in decades, my life felt full of possibility instead of obligation. The boxes started arriving at dawn. June, Harper, and even Miles, who had somehow managed to catch a red-eye flight from Costa Rica. I watched from the kitchen window as they unloaded moving supplies from Harper's BMW, their movements sharp with barely contained frustration. They'd coordinated this intervention without consulting me, assuming that a united front would convince me to abandon my plans. "Morning, Mom," Harper said briskly as they filed through the front door. She was dressed for business even on a Saturday, her hair pulled back severely and her expression set for negotiation. "We thought we'd help you organize things before you make any final decisions about the house." "How thoughtful," I replied, though their presumption irritated me. "I wasn't aware we'd scheduled a family workday." "We're worried about you," June said, reaching for my hand. "This whole thing feels so sudden, so unlike you. We thought if we helped sort through some of Dad's old papers and possessions, you might feel less overwhelmed by the house." Miles hung back near the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with confrontation, but unwilling to abandon his sister's strategy. "Mom, I know we messed up Christmas, but selling the house feels like throwing away 50 years of our family history. Your family history will survive regardless of where I live," I said. "Memories aren't stored in walls and floorboards." For the next 3 hours, we worked through the house with an efficiency that surprised me. Harper tackled the home office, organizing Richard's business papers and tax documents with her usual methodical approach. June sorted through the linen closets and storage areas, separating items for donation from things that might have sentimental value. Miles documented everything with his photographer's eye, taking detailed pictures of rooms and objects as if creating a visual archive. Their effort was genuine, their concern real, but underlying their helpfulness was a clear agenda: to overwhelm me with the magnitude of downsizing until I abandoned the idea entirely. "Mom, look at all of Dad's music," June called from the living room where she'd assembled stacks of sheet music and record albums. "If you can't possibly sort through all of this and pack it for a move, it would take months." "Then I'll hire someone to help," I replied, continuing to fold linens into donation bags. "And what about Grandma's china? And the family photos? There are probably thousands of pictures in the basement alone. I'll keep what I want and find homes for the rest." Harper emerged from the office carrying a manila folder thick with documents. "Mom, I've been looking at Dad's insurance papers and the house deed. Do you realize how much equity you have in this place? Selling now might trigger significant tax implications. I'll consult with an accountant. But why rush into this? Why not take some time to really think through all the financial and practical considerations?" I set down the sweater I'd been examining and looked at my 3 children. Seeing them clearly for perhaps the first time in years, they were intelligent, successful adults who genuinely believed they were helping me. But their help came wrapped in the assumption that I couldn't be trusted to make major decisions about my own life. "I need to show you something," I said, taking the folder from Harper's hands. We gathered around the kitchen table as I opened the deed document Harper had found. The legal language was dense and archaic, but the relevant section was clear enough once you knew what to look for. "See this clause? Here." I pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of the page. "The house was purchased in my name only. Your father insisted on it because his credit was poor when we bought the place. He'd had some financial troubles in his early 20s that were still affecting his credit score." Harper leaned forward, her lawyer's training kicking in as she read more carefully. "Wait, Dad's name isn't on the deed at all." "That's right. Legally, this house has always been solely mine. Your father contributed to the mortgage payments and maintenance, of course, but the property itself belongs entirely to me." The silence that followed was profound. I could see my children processing this information, recalculating assumptions they'd held for decades. "But we always thought ... double quotes Miles began, then trailed off." "You thought what?" "We thought it was Dad's house." "Really?" "That he was the primary owner." The admission revealed more than Miles probably intended. Despite Richard's death 15 years ago, despite my decades of maintaining and improving the property, my children had unconsciously assigned ownership to their father. The house was Dad's legacy. Mom was just the caretaker. "I let you think that," I said gently. It was easier than correcting assumptions that didn't seem to matter. But they matter now. June was staring at the deed with a stricken expression. "Mom, I'm sorry. I never meant to make you feel like you didn't have the right to make decisions about your own home. But that's exactly how you've been treating me. All of you. Like I'm a child who needs supervision, or a caretaker who exists to preserve your father's legacy." Harper's professional composure was cracking. "We're just concerned about you making such a major decision while you're upset about Christmas." "I'm not upset about Christmas, Harper. I'm upset about the pattern Christmas represented. I'm upset about organizing my life around people who treat my time and feelings as less important than their own convenience." "That's not fair," Miles protested. "We all have busy lives, complicated schedules, and I have a life too, or at least I want to have one again." I pulled out the folder of real estate listings Helen and I had compiled, spreading photographs of condos and apartments across the table. "I want to live somewhere I can walk to restaurants and bookstores. I want to take art classes and join clubs, and meet people who don't see me primarily as someone's mother or widow. I want to travel without worrying about who's checking on the house or whether the pipes will freeze while I'm gone. But you've never expressed interest in any of those things before, June said. When would I have expressed them? When you called to cancel dinner plans. When you visited for 3 hours twice a year. When have any of you asked what I want for my future instead of telling me what you need from me? The questions hung in the air like accusations, which in many ways they were. For years, our family dynamic had been based on the assumption that my role was to provide stability and support, while theirs was to pursue their own interests and ambitions. The idea that I might want to reverse that equation seemed to genuinely shock them. "We love you, Mom," Harper said finally. "We don't want you to do something you'll regret. I regret plenty of things already. I regret letting you take me for granted. I regret not traveling with your father when we had the chance because we were always saving money for your college expenses or house repairs. I regret spending the last 15 years maintaining a shrine to family memories that only I seem to care about preserving." "We care about those memories," Miles said. "Do you? When was the last time any of you looked through the photo albums I've been meticulously organizing? When did you last play the piano I've kept tuned? When did you spend more than an hour in this house doing something other than sleeping or eating?" They had no answers, because we all knew the truth. Alderwood House had become a museum of their childhoods, lovingly maintained by me and occasionally visited by them. But museums exist to preserve the past, not to nurture the present. "I found something else interesting in Dad's papers," I continued, pulling out a travel brochure that had been tucked between insurance documents. He'd been researching river cruises in Europe. He wanted to take me to see the Christmas markets in Germany, the tulip fields in Holland. We talked about it for years, but never booked. It's anything because there was always some expense related to the house or your educations. The brochure was worn from handling, marked with Richard's handwriting, noting dates and prices. Seeing it had broken something loose in my chest. A grief not just for his death, but for all the experiences we'd postponed indefinitely. "I'm 76 years old," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "If I don't start living for myself now, when will I? When I'm 80 and afraid to travel alone? When I'm 90 and too frail to leave whatever care facility you've chosen for me?" "Mom, that's not," June started. "It's exactly what will happen if I continue letting other people's comfort dictate my choices. You'll visit occasionally, feel guilty about not visiting more often. Eventually start discussing what to do about Mom, the way you probably discuss your work problems as logistical challenges to be managed." The truth of this prediction settled over the kitchen like a heavy blanket. We all knew I was right, that aging parents too often become burdens to be borne rather than people to be cherished. "What if we visited more often?" Harper asked. "What if we made a real effort to spend more time here?" "I don't want visits motivated by guilt or obligation. I want relationships based on mutual interest and affection. And if those don't exist, naturally, I'd rather be honest about it than continue pretending." Miles was studying the real estate listings, his expression thoughtful. "Some of these places look really nice, Mom. This one in Saratoga Springs, you could walk to the racetrack. Take the train to New York City. You'd be okay with me living in New York. I'd be okay with you being happy. And if you're not happy here," he let the sentence trail off, but the implication was clear. For the first time, one of my children was acknowledging that my happiness might be more important than their convenience. "I think you should do it," he said quietly. "I think you should sell the house and buy one of these condos and live whatever life you want to live." Harper and June stared at him as if he'd betrayed some fundamental family loyalty. But I felt a rush of gratitude toward my middle child, the one who'd always been the most conflict avoidant, for having the courage to support my independence. "Miles," Harper said sharply, "don't encourage her to make impulsive decisions. It's not impulsive if she's been thinking about it for months or years, and it's not our decision to make. But the family home will always be our family home in our memories. But Mom deserves to live somewhere that makes her happy, not somewhere that makes us comfortable." The conversation that followed was difficult and sometimes painful. Harper struggled with a loss of control with having to accept a decision she couldn't influence or override. June worried about practical concerns, my safety, my social connections, the logistics of managing a move at my age. But underneath their objections was a gradual recognition that my independence wasn't a threat to our relationship. Their assumptions about my limitations were, by the time they left that evening, we'd reached an understanding. They would support. My decision to sell would help with the practical aspects of moving and would visit me wherever I chose to relocate. In return, I promised to consider their concerns about my safety and to include them in my decision-making process without letting their preferences override my own. "I'm proud of you, Mom," June said as she hugged me goodbye. It took courage to stand up to us like that. It took courage to finally stand up for myself. That night, I sat in my living room holding Richard's travel brochure and Helen's mother's bracelet, thinking about the strange turns life takes. 6 months ago, I'd been a lonely widow maintaining a house that felt increasingly like a burden. Now I was a woman with plans and possibilities, preparing to build a life based on my own desires, rather than other people's expectations. The house deed lay on the coffee table where Harper had left it. Legal proof of something I'd always known, but never had to assert this was my home, my decision. My life to live as I chose, for the first time since Richard's death. I felt like the protagonist of my own story rather than a supporting character in everyone else's. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday morning in January, and by Thursday afternoon we had 3 showing appointments scheduled. Jonah Carter had been right about the market. Apparently, there was tremendous demand for historic homes with character, especially ones that had been lovingly maintained for nearly 5 decades. I spent those intervening days in a strange state of suspended animation, moving through rooms that no longer felt entirely mine, while strangers evaluated my life's work with tape measures and clipboards. The first showing was a young couple from Boston, both doctors looking for a place to raise their future family. They loved the hardwood floors and period details, but worried about the distance from major medical centers. The second showing brought a family with 3 teenagers who saw the house primarily as a venue for entertaining and seemed unconcerned about the outdated kitchen. But it was the third couple who captured my imagination. Both retired teachers in their early 60s. Recently, relocated from California to be closer to their East Coast grandchildren. They walked through the house with the same reverence Richard and I had felt when we first toured it in 1975. Commenting on the craftsmanship and imagining how they might use each room. "This would be perfect for my piano," the woman said, standing in what had been our formal living room. "Look at these windows. The morning light would be incredible for reading." "The garden has good bones," her husband noted, studying the backyard through the kitchen window. "With some work we could probably grow most of our own vegetables." Watching them envision their future in my house felt unexpectedly healing. For months, I'd been focused on what I was losing by selling the memories. The history, the tangible connection to my life with Richard and the children's childhoods. But seeing this couple's excitement reminded me that houses are meant to be lived in, loved in, filled with new memories and possibilities. "They'll make an offer," Jonah told me after the showing ended. I could see it in their faces. They're not just buying a house. They're buying into a dream of how they want to spend their retirement. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was selling my dream house to people who saw it as the foundation for their dream retirement, while I prepared to chase my own dreams in a completely different setting. The offer came the next morning, full asking price, with a 60-day closing timeline that would give me time to find alternative housing and coordinate the move. I accepted immediately, partly because the terms were generous, but mostly because the buyers felt right. If I had to say goodbye to Alderwood House, I wanted it to go to people who would appreciate what Richard and I had built here. "Congratulations," Jonah said when I called to accept the offer. "How are you feeling about everything?" "Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure," I admitted. I haven't lived anywhere else in almost 50 years. Would you like some help finding a new place? I have contacts in several areas, including Saratoga Springs, if you're still considering that. Option. Actually, I've been thinking about something more adventurous. What would you think about me renting a furnished apartment for a year while I travel and explore different areas? The pause that followed wasn't judgmental, just thoughtful. That's actually brilliant. Give yourself time to experience different places before committing to any one location. My children think I'm being impulsive. Your children probably haven't made a major life change in decades. Sometimes what looks like impulsiveness is actually courage. That afternoon, Helen came, over with Chinese takeout and a bottle of champagne to celebrate the sale. We sat at my kitchen table, soon to belong to retired teachers from California, planning what she called my liberation tour. You should start with someplace warm, she suggested, opening fortune cookies and reading the predictions aloud. Arizona, maybe, or Florida. See how you like retirement communities versus regular neighborhoods. I was thinking about that cruise Richard wanted to take, the Christmas markets in Germany. Eleanor Rowan, you are full of surprises. When would you go? This December? I'll be settled somewhere by then, and it seems like appropriate timing. A year after the Christmas that changed everything. What if you meet some charming European gentleman and decide to relocate to Tuscany or something? The idea was so outrageous, I laughed out loud, but Helen's expression was perfectly serious. I'm 76 years old, Helen. I'm not looking for romance. Why not? You've got 15 good years left, probably more. Richard would want you to be happy, wouldn't he? And happiness doesn't have an expiration date. The conversation stayed with me that evening as I began the overwhelming task of deciding what to keep, what to donate, and what to throw away. Each room held decades of accumulated possessions, from the practical to the purely sentimental. Richard's tools in the basement, Christmas decorations that hadn't been used in years, boxes of photographs documenting family milestones and ordinary moments alike. I started with the easiest decisions: outdated electronics, clothes that no longer fit, kitchen gadgets I'd never used. But every few items I'd encounter something that stopped me completely. A valentine Richard had made for me in 1983. Constructed from construction paper and featuring a poem about our mortgage payments. A ceramic ashtray Harper had made in third grade, painted with uneven stripes and proudly inscribed for Daddy. A wooden jewelry box Miles had built in shop class, still containing the cheap earrings he'd bought me for Mother's Day when he was 14. These objects held emotional weight far beyond their practical value, but most were too personal to mean anything to anyone else. The valentine would puzzle whoever inherited it. The ashtray would likely end up at Goodwill. The jewelry box might be recycled or discarded entirely, yet throwing them away felt like erasing the love and effort they represented. You're overthinking this, June said when she stopped by the next evening to help with the sorting process. Keep what makes you happy and let go of the rest. The memories aren't stored in the objects. She was right, of course, but knowing that intellectually didn't make the emotional process easier. Each decision felt weighted with significance, as if I were editing the story of our family by choosing which artifacts to preserve. What about this? June held up a photograph of the four of us taken at Christmas 1987. The children were young teenagers, still willing to pose for family pictures, still living primarily at home. Richard and I looked impossibly young ourselves, our faces unmarked by the losses and disappointments that would come later. I'm taking that one, I said immediately. Whatever else I left behind, I wanted to remember us as we were in that moment, a complete family, still believing we'd always have time for each other. The phone rang frequently during those sorting days. Harper called with questions about the closing process and recommendations for moving companies. Miles checked in from various locations, offering to arrange storage for items I wasn't ready to part with but couldn't take with me. Friends from church and the community choir stopped by to say goodbye and to volunteer help with packing. But the most surprising call came from Jonah Carter on a Friday evening, his voice carrying a hesitancy I hadn't heard before. "Mrs. Rowan, I hope you don't mind me calling your personal line. I wanted to ask you something that's not related to the house sale. Of course, what can I help you with?" Well, this might be completely inappropriate, and please feel free to say no if I'm overstepping. But I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime, just as friends, to celebrate your successful sale and maybe talk about your travel plans. The invitation was so unexpected, I almost laughed. When had a man last asked me to dinner? When had I last considered the possibility of sharing a meal with someone who wasn't family or a longtime friend? It's very kind of you, Jonah, but are you sure it's appropriate? I mean, given our professional relationship, the professional relationship is ending once we close on the house. And I promise I'm not asking for anything more than conversation over a good meal. I just, well, I admire what you're doing. The courage it takes to completely reinvent your life at this stage. I'd like to hear more about your plans. There was something in his voice that suggested he might be contemplating his own life changes. That perhaps my story resonated with his own experience in ways I didn't fully understand. I'd like that. I heard myself saying, but I should warn you, I'm completely out of practice with social dinners. So am I. Maybe we can figure it out together. We arranged to meet the following Tuesday at a restaurant downtown. Nothing fancy, but somewhere quiet enough for conversation. After we hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by boxes and sorting piles, wondering when my life had become so unexpectedly interesting. Helen was delighted when I told her about the dinner invitation. "See? I told you happiness doesn't have an expiration date." Jonah Carter is a good man, from what I hear. Divorced about 5 years ago, treats his clients well, volunteers at the animal shelter. It's just dinner, Helen, between friends. Of course it is. And sometimes friendships between interesting people lead to other things. Not that you're looking for other things naturally. Naturally. But as I continued packing and planning over the weekend, I found myself looking forward to Tuesday evening with an anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Not necessarily romantic anticipation, but the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with someone new. Someone who saw me as Eleanor, rather than Mom or Mrs. Rowan or the widow who lived in the big house on Maple Street. The boxes accumulated daily, now labeled with destinations: new apartment storage, donate, June, Harper, Miles. Each label represented a decision about what version of myself I wanted to carry forward and what I was ready to leave behind. By Sunday evening, I'd filled 14 boxes with items for my children: photo albums, family heirlooms, keepsakes, from their childhoods that I thought they might want to preserve for their own families. I'd also filled 6 boxes with items for donation. Things that had served their purpose in our family but might bring joy to other people. Most surprisingly, I'd filled only 4 boxes with items I definitely wanted to take with me. My favorite books, a few pieces of jewelry with sentimental value, my grandmother's silver tea service, and enough clothing for a fresh start somewhere new. The rest, the furniture, the majority of kitchen items, the decorative objects that had defined my aesthetic for decades, would be sold with the house or donated. It felt both liberating and terrifying to discover how little I actually needed to maintain my sense of self. "You're really doing this," I said aloud to my nearly empty bedroom, my voice echoing slightly in the space that had defined home for almost 50 years. Yes, I thought, I really am. The dinner with Jonah was supposed to be a quiet celebration of new beginnings, but it turned into something much more significant. We met at Benedetto's, a small Italian restaurant downtown that I'd driven past hundreds of times but never entered. The lighting was soft, the atmosphere intimate without being romantic. And Jonah had already secured a corner table where we could talk without competing with other conversations. "You look lovely," he said as I approached the table, and I realized he was right. I'd taken care with my appearance in a way I hadn't in years. choosing a navy dress that flattered my figure and earrings that caught the candlelight. For the first time in decades, I felt attractive rather than simply presentable. Thank you. This is a beautiful restaurant. I can't believe I've never been here before. That's one of the advantages of starting over. You get to discover places that were right under your nose all along. We ordered wine and appetizers, falling into conversation with an ease that surprised me. Jonah told me about his own recent life changes. His divorce, 5 years earlier, after his wife decided she wanted a different kind of retirement than he did. His struggle to redefine himself as a single man after 35 years of marriage. The hardest part, he said, was realizing I'd become so focused on providing for my family that I'd forgotten what I actually enjoyed doing. When my wife left, I discovered I didn't have any hobbies, any interests that weren't connected to work or family obligations. What did you do? I started saying yes to things that scared me, took photography classes, joined a hiking group, signed up for cooking lessons. Some of it stuck, some of it didn't, but all of it taught me something about who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs. His story resonated deeply with my own experience. How many years had I spent being Richard's wife, the children's mother, the reliable neighbor who could always be counted on to help with community projects? When had I last done something simply because it interested me? That's exactly what I'm hoping to discover, I told him. Who I am when I'm not maintaining other people's idea of who I should be. It's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time, isn't it? We were deep in conversation about travel plans and retirement dreams when my phone began buzzing insistently. Harper's number appeared on the screen, then June's, then Miles calling from Costa Rica. I declined the calls, but they kept coming. I'm sorry, I told Jonah. Something might be wrong. Let me just check. Harper's text message was brief but alarming. Emergency at house. Come home immediately. My stomach dropped. Had there been a break-in, a fire, some problem with the sale that required immediate attention? I have to go, I told Jonah, already reaching for my purse. There's some kind of emergency at the house. I'll drive you, he said without hesitation, signaling for the check. The 15-minute drive to Maple Street felt endless. Jonah's presence was calming, but my mind raced through worst-case scenarios. The house had been empty since afternoon, secured but not occupied. What could have gone wrong? We pulled into my driveway behind Harper's BMW, and I could see lights on throughout the house, through the front windows. I glimpsed movement, multiple people walking around inside my home. Do you want me to come in with you? Jonah asked. Oh, but thank you. This is clearly family business. The front door was unlocked, which immediately set off alarm bells. I never left the house unlocked, especially not when I was out for the evening. But as I stepped inside, I realized the emergency wasn't what I'd feared. My 3 children were standing in the living room, surrounded by dozens of boxes and garbage bags, looking guilty and defiant in equal measure. They'd clearly been there for hours, going through my careful sorting and repacking things according to their own criteria. What is this? I asked, my voice sharp with confusion and anger. Mom, we need to talk, Harper said, her lawyer voice in full effect. We've been discussing the situation, and we think you're making a serious mistake. We've repacked some of the things you were planning to donate, June added quickly. Family heirlooms, photos, things that are too valuable to give away. We've arranged for a storage unit, Miles said from the doorway. So you don't have to make permanent decisions about everything right now? I looked around my living room, seeing months of careful decision-making undone in a single evening. Items I'd deliberately chosen to leave behind were now packed in boxes labeled Keep. Donations I'd thoughtfully selected were nowhere to be seen. You came into my house without permission and undid all my work. My voice was getting louder, anger building with each word. We have keys, Harper said defensively, and we were trying to help. You're not thinking clearly about what's important? I'm not thinking clearly. Mom, you were about to give away Grandma's china, June said. And Dad's tools. And all those photo albums from when we were kids. These things are irreplaceable. They're my things to give away or keep as I choose. But they're family history. Miles protested. They belong to all of us in a way. The presumption was breathtaking. After months of minimal contact, they decided to stage an intervention based on their assumptions about what I should value and preserve. They'd entered my home, disregarded my decisions, and rearranged my life according to their preferences. "Get out," I said quietly. Mom Harper started, "Get out," I shouted, surprising myself with the volume and force of my voice. "All of you, get out of my house right now." "You're overreacting," Harper said, her tone condescending. "We're trying to help you avoid making decisions you'll regret later. The only thing I regret is raising children who think they have the right to override my choices because they disagree with them." "We love you," June said, tears starting to form. "We don't want you to do something that will hurt you." "You don't? Want me to do something that will inconvenience you? There's a difference." The accusation hung in the air like a physical presence. My children stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to hurt to anger. But none of them denied what I'd said. "Is that really what you think of us?" Miles asked quietly. "I think you've spent so many years treating me like a supporting character in your lives that you can't imagine me as the protagonist of my own story. That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, the sound bitter even to my own ears. "Is it fair that you canceled Christmas dinner at the last minute? Is it fair that you visit twice a year and expect me to maintain your childhood bedrooms like shrines? Is it fair that you break into my house and undo my decisions because you don't trust my judgment?" "We didn't break in," Harper said stiffly. "We have keys, and we're family. Family doesn't give you the right to disrespect my autonomy. Having keys doesn't give you permission to enter my home without invitation." "But Mom," June said desperately, "what if you sell the house and regret it? What if you move somewhere and you're lonely and unhappy? What if something happens to you and we can't help because you're too far away?" The questions revealed the heart of their resistance. They weren't just afraid of losing their childhood home. They were afraid of losing control over my life. As long as I stayed in the same place, maintained the same routines, preserved the same role in their lives, they could continue relating to me as a stable, unchanging constant. "What if I'm happier than I've been in years?" I countered. "What if I make new friends and discover new interests and have adventures I never imagined? What if independence turns out to be exactly what I need? But the risk," Harper began. "Risk of staying here is greater than the risk of leaving. The risk of spending my remaining years waiting for children who will always have something more important to do." "We'll visit more often," June promised. "We'll make more effort to include you in our lives. I don't want visits motivated by guilt or obligation. I want relationships based on mutual interest and respect. And if those don't exist naturally, I'd rather acknowledge that honestly than continue pretending." Miles stepped forward, his expression more thoughtful than defensive. "Mom, what do you need from us? Not what we think you need, but what you actually want." The question was so unexpected, so different from his sister's attempts to manage and control, that it stopped my anger mid-flow. "I need you to respect my decisions, even when you disagree with them. I need you to trust that I'm capable of managing my own life. And I need you to understand that being your mother is only one part of who I am. We can do that," he said quietly, "can't we?" He looked at his sisters with an expression that demanded honesty. Harper's composure was finally cracking. "I just don't understand why everything has to change so dramatically. Why can't you just be our mom the way you've always been?" The question revealed everything. Harper wanted me frozen in time, perpetually available, perpetually unchanged. The idea that I might grow and evolve and want different things was threatening to her sense of stability, because being your mom the way I've always been was killing me slowly. I said simply, I was disappearing into the role, losing myself completely. I need to remember who I am beyond what other people need from me. But what if we need you? June asked, her voice small. Then you'll figure out how to tell me that in a way that doesn't require me to sacrifice my own happiness. And if you can't, then maybe we need to redefine what family means to us. The silence that followed was heavy, with grief not just for the changes ahead, but for the loss of illusions we'd all maintained about our relationships. My children were mourning the end of a dynamic that had never been as healthy as they'd believed. I was mourning the years I'd spent accommodating that dynamic instead of challenging it. I'm still your mother, I said finally. Still love you. More than my own life. But I'm also a woman with my own dreams and needs and desires. Those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. We love you too, Miles said. And we want you to be happy. Selling the house and moving away will make you happy? Then we support that. Do you mean that? Mean it? And I think Harper and June mean it too, even if they're having trouble saying it right now. Harper was crying silently, her perfect composure completely gone. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared of losing you. You're not losing me. Just losing the version of me that existed primarily to make your lives easier. June moved closer, reaching for my hand. Can you forgive us for tonight? For not trusting you to make your own decisions? I looked around my living room, seeing the boxes they'd repacked with their own priorities, the chaos they'd created in their attempt to control my choices. But I also saw 3 adult children who were struggling to accept their mother's independence, who were grieving the end of their own childhoods in the only way they knew how. Help me put everything back the way I had it, I said. Respect the decisions I've made about what to keep and what to let go. Okay, yes, I'll forgive you. We spent the next 2 hours undoing their intervention, returning items to their designated piles, having difficult conversations about attachment and control, and the difference between helping and interfering. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves, but we made progress. By the time they left, we'd reached a new understanding. They would support my decision to sell and relocate, would visit me wherever I chose to live, and would work on relating to me as an independent adult rather than an extension of their own needs. I'm proud of you, Mom, Harper said as she hugged me goodbye. It took courage to stand up to us tonight. Took courage to finally stand up for myself. After they were gone, I called Jonah to apologize for the abrupt end to our dinner. Nice. Everything all right? He asked. Everything is better than all right. My children and I just had the most honest conversation we've had in years. I'm glad. That kind of honesty isn't always comfortable, but it's usually necessary. Would you like to try dinner again sometime? Maybe after I'm settled in my new place. I'd like that very much. And Eleanor, good for you for not backing down tonight. As I hung up the phone and looked around my house with my decisions intact, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete alignment between who I was and how I was living my life in 6 weeks. I would close on the sale and begin the adventure I'd been planning for months. My children would adjust to having a mother who prioritized her own happiness, and I would finally discover who Eleanor Rowan was when she wasn't trying to be everything to everyone else. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. The keys to my new apartment arrived on a Tuesday in March, delivered by certified, mailed to the hotel where I'd been staying while finalizing the move from Vermont. They were small and ordinary, brass-colored, attached to a simple keyring with the apartment number printed on a plastic tag. But holding them in my palm, I felt the weight of possibility they represented. The apartment was in Saratoga Springs, in a converted Victorian mansion that had been tastefully divided into 6 units. Mine was on the 2nd floor, with tall windows overlooking a tree-lined street and a small balcony where I could grow herbs and flowers in containers. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with updated appliances, and a living room with the original hardwood floors and period moldings. It was perhaps 1/5 the size of Alderwood House, but it felt exactly right. Are you nervous? Helen asked as she helped me unpack the boxes I'd shipped ahead. She'd driven down from Vermont to help with the transition and to satisfy her curiosity about my new life. Nervous and excited, I admitted, hanging my grandmother's silver tea service in a place of honor on the kitchen wall. It's been 30 years since I've lived anywhere, Richard, and I didn't choose together. How does it feel to be making decisions based entirely on your own preferences? I paused in my unpacking to consider the question. The apartment was decorated in ways Richard never would have chosen: lighter colors, more feminine touches, furniture arranged for reading and relaxation rather than entertaining. For the first time in decades, my living space reflected only my tastes and needs. Liberating, I said finally, and a little lonely sometimes. But the good kind of lonely, if that makes sense. The kind that comes from independence rather than abandonment. Helen nodded knowingly. I felt the same way when I started the bed and breakfast. Scary but exhilarating to be completely responsible for your own happiness. My children had surprised me with their support during the final weeks of the transition. Harper had helped coordinate the moving company and had flown up from New York to oversee the last details of the house closing. Miles had returned from Costa Rica to collect his belongings and had spent 2 days helping me sort through photo albums, keeping some, and letting others go with surprisingly little sentimentality. June had driven down to Saratoga Springs the week before to help me set up utilities and had stocked my refrigerator with basic supplies. I still think you're crazy, Harper had told me as we signed the final paperwork transferring Alderwood House to its new owners. But I'm starting to think crazy might be exactly what you need. Crazy or just overdue, I'd replied, watching the retired teachers from California take possession of the keys to my former life. The closing had been more emotional than I'd expected. Seeing strangers receive the keys to the house where I'd raised my children, where I'd spent 48 years of marriage and widowhood, where I'd defined myself primarily in relation to other people. It marked the end of an era in ways that felt both profound and healing. But the emotions weren't entirely sad. Standing in the empty house one final time, I'd felt gratitude for the memories it held and excitement for the memories I was about to create elsewhere. The house had served its purpose beautifully. Now it was time for both of us to begin new chapters. Have you heard from Jonah lately? Helen asked with studied casualness as we arranged books on the built-in shelves. He calls every few days to check on how I'm settling in. He's been incredibly thoughtful about the transition and what? Eleanor Rowan, don't play coy with me. The man is clearly interested in more than your real estate satisfaction. I felt myself blushing, something I hadn't done in years. We're friends, Helen. We enjoy each other's company. Friends who have dinner together twice a week and take long walks in the park. He's showing me around town, being helpful. He's courting you, you nincompoop. The question is whether you're interested in being courted. The idea still felt foreign and slightly shocking. At 76, was I really contemplating romance? Was such a thing even possible after 15 years of widowhood and decades of defining myself primarily as someone's wife and mother? I don't know if I remember how to be romantic, I admitted. It's like riding a bicycle. The muscles remember even when your brain is rusty. That evening, Jonah took me to dinner at a restaurant with outdoor seating, where we could watch the sunset and listen to live jazz. He'd brought me a small potted orchid as a housewarming gift, something beautiful but not presumptuous, requiring care but not overwhelming my small space. You look happy, he said as we shared an appetizer and compared notes about our respective days. I feel happy. Different than I expected, but definitely happy. How so? I thought independence would feel more solitary, I suppose, but instead it feels expansive. Like there's room in my life for things I never considered before, such as the question felt loaded with possibility, such as learning to paint watercolors, which I'd started the week before, such as joining the community theater group, something I'd always wanted to try but never had time for, such as allowing myself to feel attracted to a kind, intelligent man who seemed to enjoy my company. Such as this, I said, gesturing between us. Whatever this is, Jonah's smile was warm and slightly uncertain. I've been wondering about that myself. What this is, I'm out of practice with relationships that aren't familial. I'm not sure I remember how to navigate this. We don't have to navigate anything quickly. We can take our time, figure it out as we go. The lack of pressure in his voice was reassuring. After decades of relationships defined by obligation and expectation, the idea of something developing, naturally, without predetermined roles or outcomes, felt revolutionary. I'd like that, I said, taking our time. Good, because I'd like to keep having dinner with you and taking walks in the park and seeing where this friendship leads us. Friendship. The word felt safer than romance, but carried the promise of more. At 76, perhaps friendship was the foundation for whatever came next. Later that evening, so I sat on my small balcony with a cup of tea and the latest mystery novel I'd borrowed from the local library. I reflected on the changes of the past 6 months. The Eleanor who had set that Christmas table for 7 people seemed like a different person. Someone whose life was constrained by other people's schedules and expectations. Someone who defined herself primarily through service to others. This, Eleanor, the one drinking tea on her own balcony in a city where she'd chosen to live, felt more authentic. More aligned with desires she'd suppressed for decades. The loneliness I'd feared never materialized. Or rather, it was replaced by solitude, which felt completely different. Loneliness was involuntary isolation. Solitude was chosen space for reflection and growth. My phone buzzed with a text from June. How was your first week? Are you settling in okay? Better than okay, I typed back. I'm taking a painting class next week and I think I'm going to join the community choir. That sounds wonderful, Mom. I'm proud of you. The exchange was brief but significant. My children were learning to relate to me as an independent adult rather than a caretaker whose existence revolved around their needs. The adjustment wasn't always smooth. Harper still occasionally called with unsolicited advice about my finances or safety. But the underlying dynamic had shifted fundamentally. They were no longer treating me like a burden to be managed or a convenience to be utilized. Instead, they were discovering they had a mother who was interesting in her own right, someone whose life adventures they could celebrate rather than monitor. The cruise to Germany's Christmas markets was booked for December, nearly a year after the Christmas dinner that had catalyzed this entire transformation. I would travel alone initially, though Jonah had expressed interest in joining me if our relationship continued to develop. The idea of seeing those markets Richard had dreamed about felt like completing a circle, honoring his memory while claiming experiences that belonged entirely to me. I asked myself aloud, a question I hadn't posed in years. Yes, I realized. Not content, not satisfied, not merely getting by, but genuinely happy. Happy in a way that came from alignment between my values and my choices, between my desires and my daily reality. The evening air was soft and warm, carrying the scent of flowering trees and the distant sounds of neighbors enjoying their own small pleasures. Somewhere in the building, someone was practicing piano. Scales and arpeggios that reminded me of my own musical past but didn't make me nostalgic for it. This was my life now. Not a compromised version of someone else's dreams, not a scaled-down adaptation of previous plans, but a chosen adventure based entirely on my own preferences and possibilities. At 76, I was finally the protagonist of my own story. The keys to my apartment sat on the small table beside my chair, catching the light from the street lamp below. Such ordinary objects. But they represented something extraordinary. The courage to choose uncertainty over disappointment, possibility over obligation, and my own happiness over everyone else's comfort. Tomorrow, I would call the community theater about auditions for their spring production. Thursday, I would attend my first painting class. Next month, I would join a book club Helen had found for me online. In December, I would board a ship in Amsterdam and sail toward Christmas markets I'd waited 50 years to see. The future stretched ahead like an open road. full of destinations I'd never considered and experiences I'd never imagined possible. For the first time in decades, I couldn't wait to discover what came next. The Christmas of 2024 looked nothing like the ones I used to host at Alderwood House. And that was exactly the point. I woke up alone, but not lonely. Light filtered through the lace curtains of my Saratoga Springs apartment. Casting soft shadows on the walls, I'd painted a pale robin's egg blue just last month. There was no turkey thawing in the sink, no heirloom china on the table, no scent of cloves or nutmeg drifting from the oven. Instead, there was jazz playing softly on the radio and a stack of library books by my reading chair. I'd planned a quiet day for myself and art exhibit at the Tang Museum, followed by dinner reservations at a little Italian place I'd discovered 2 blocks over, where the owner wore suspenders and always brought me an extra biscotti with my espresso. There was a time not long ago when the idea of spending Christmas like this would have gutted me. I would have cried over the absence of voices, over chairs not pulled out and wine glasses left unfilled. But this year, for the first time in decades, the day didn't feel like a disappointment. It felt like mine. Around noon, the phone rang. June, she and the kids had just finished unwrapping presents and wanted to FaceTime me before heading out to Derek's parents' house. I saw the kids' eager faces pressed close to the screen, each showing off their gifts with that giddy, unfiltered energy only children possess. We laughed, we talked. I told them I missed them, and I meant it. But I didn't feel the usual ache in my chest. Because missing someone isn't the same as being forgotten, and for once, I wasn't the only one trying to stay connected. Harper called next. She and Brad were at a ski lodge again, but this time she didn't try to justify it. Instead, she said, I was thinking about last year. I owe you more than just an apology, owe you presents. You taught me something, Mom, about boundaries, about how loving someone sometimes means letting them live their own truth. She paused, her voice softer. Next year, I want to spend Christmas with you, wherever you are. Miles followed with a voice message. He was in Patagonia photographing. Glacier's Butt had remembered to send a short video of his surroundings. In the background, he'd caught a group of penguins waddling comically across the snow. You'd love it here, Mom, he said. Let's go somewhere together next spring. Just you and me, cameras optional. Each message was its own small miracle, not because they were extravagant, but because they weren't laced with guilt or obligation. My children weren't suddenly transformed. They were still busy, still flawed, but they were beginning to see me not just as their mother, but as a person with a life outside their orbit. And that shift, though subtle, was seismic. After the calls, I put on my coat and stepped into the crisp December air. The streets were quiet, the kind of peaceful that settles deep in your bones. Snow dusted the railings of the old Victorian porches nearby. A family walked past pulling a red sled behind them. The child bundled in a hat with a pom-pom that bounced with every step at the museum. I wandered through an exhibit on women artists, over 70 women who had spent most of their lives tending to others before finally tending to themselves. Their work pulsed with late-blooming vibrancy. I stood in front of a canvas titled Reclamation, a bold mix of reds and ochres and blues, and felt a pang of recognition. Not because I'd ever been a painter, but because I understood what it meant to begin again after everyone assumes your story is over. Later, at dinner, I sat by the window and watched the snow begin to fall in earnest. I'd brought along a novel I was halfway through, but I ended up watching the snowfall instead, letting the quiet settle around me like a favorite blanket. The waiter, the same young man who always remembered my order, brought me a slice of lemon cake on the house. 2 new beginnings, he said with a grin. I nodded. Exactly. I still miss Richard. That will never change. There are moments like when I see an older couple holding hands on the street, or when I hear a Sinatra song playing in a grocery store, that I feel his absence like a freshly opened wound. But even that grief has softened. It's no longer a weight I carry, but a companion I acknowledge with tenderness. If anything, I think Richard would have been proud of me for selling the house, for chasing my own life instead of staying frozen in the one we've built together. As for Alderwood House, it now belongs to the retired teachers from California. They send me postcards, can you believe it? Postcards baiting me on the garden, the changes they're making to the kitchen, how the neighbors have welcomed them. They even kept the name Alderwood and hung a wooden sign on the front porch that reads, "Memories begin here." It makes me smile. I visit Vermont sometimes, but not out of nostalgia. I go for the farmers' markets to see Helen, to attend a choral concert when the church bells ring across the green. And when I do drive past the old house, I feel something close to joy, not for what I left behind, but for what it made possible. The funny thing is, it wasn't just the house I sold. I sold the story I'd been telling myself for years, that my worth was tied to how much I gave, how well I preserved, how quietly I endured. Letting go of Alderwood was how I made room for something else. Possibility. Next spring, I'm going to Europe, not with a tour group or an itinerary printed on glossy paper. It's just me, a small suitcase, and a list of places Richard and I once dreamed of seeing. I'll start with Germany, then maybe the Netherlands. I don't know where I'll go after that, Tan, for the first time. I find that thrilling rather than terrifying. In my wallet, I carry something small and slightly worn, a folded brochure for a river cruise Richard had marked up years ago. His notes still live in the margins. His scribbles, the way he circled dates and added little exclamation points next to towns he found interesting. I keep it with me, not because I need it to remember him, but because it reminds me that it's never too late to say yes to the life we once imagined. This Christmas wasn't loud, didn't involve wrapping paper or the chaos of grandchildren, or the sound of a turkey carving knife. It was quiet, intentional, full of breath and stillness. It was mine, and that, after a lifetime of giving's the greatest gift I've ever received. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.